Hi, this is Paul and welcome to Texturing and Rendering. In this lesson we're going to go over bump and displacement maps inside of Maya. Before we begin, I just wanted to take a look at this image right here and kind of explain what's happening when we do bump and displacement maps. Both of them are actually going to utilize a grayscale image. In this specific case, this is an RGB image, as you can see here, but you can use a grayscale image as well. Regardless, even if you have an RGB image, Maya is going to interpret that as grayscale. It will actually use the luminance information of this RGB image and output an alpha from that. So by default, that alpha is going to be the luminance information. All right, so in this image, you can see that we have varying levels of gray here. Now, what's going to happen on both displacement maps and on bump maps is 50% gray inside of the image is going to do absolutely nothing. It will just leave the model alone. Values that are lighter than 50% gray are actually going to get bumped up, and values that are darker than 50% gray are going to get bumped down. Now, let's jump inside of Maya. Now, we'll go ahead and use this image inside of Maya just so you can see what's going on. And what I want to do is I just want to get a nice bumpy feel on the model from these. Alright, so we'll jump in Maya here, and you see we have two spheres inside of here. And I'll go ahead and do a quick render of this just so we can see what we have. Now what we've got here is the one on the left is actually utilizing a bump map, and the one on the right is utilizing a displacement map. And as you can see, at this level, they basically look the same. There's not much difference between these two. If I was to go up here and click on the alpha channel, you can now see a little bit of difference between these. You can see that the edge on this one is quite a bit more bumpy than this one. This one is nice and smooth. So what this tells us is that when you're using a bump map, it's not actually physically moving geometry around. It's just kind of tricking the camera into making this object look bumpy. Now this one, the displacement map, you can see that it is actually moving the geometry around, and that's why we're getting all of the bumps on the edges right here. Just a quick note on render time. Bump maps render quite a bit faster than displacement maps do. So when you can use a bump map, you should definitely use a bump map. Don't always think that you're going to need to put a displacement map in there. And, frankly, at a level like this, it's a little hard to tell the difference between the two. Now, if this image right here, let me just move this camera back a bit, maybe at this level, I'm sure we're going to have a really hard time telling the difference between the two. So at this level, you're probably better off just using the bump map because it's going to render a lot faster. Now, however, if I move in close, like about there, and render this again, this is going to be an instance where you just can't get away with using a bump map up this close, especially if you're seeing the profile, the image right here. You're getting the bump in here, which is fine. This looks all right, but again, nice and smooth around here. You can clearly see the difference between the two images. So if you're seeing the profile of an object like this, and you are this close on it, you're a lot better off using a displacement map. Just because this looks a little strange having this really, really smooth coming across here. But again, when you're out this far, you can't really tell the difference between the two, so it's probably not worth the added render time to go through and do a displacement map on top of that. All right, let me open up another scene here. I'll open up this one. All right, now in this scene we've got just a basic plane here, and we do have a bump map set up on here. And here you can see the file. It's just kind of a little grungy little texture on there. So let's go ahead and render this. So in an instance like this, where you're not really seeing the profile of an image, you're much better off using a bump map in this scenario. You're really not going to gain anything by displacing this at this level. So again, we're not really seeing the profile. Even if you were to get up fairly close to this image, it's probably still going to hold up as a bump map. So in this case, bump map I think would be a lot better, and you'd save a lot more time in render as opposed to putting a displacement map on there. All right, let's close this, and let's put a different texture in here. Let's see, I'll put this one in there. Now, in this specific case, I'll open this up in Photoshop so you can see what it is. I've got an image here, just so we can really see what's happening with the actual bump map. You've got a 50% gray inside of here, and then this is pure white. You've got pure black here, and then you have different shades of gray up here. So essentially what we should get is this 50% gray right here should do absolutely nothing. This should bump up a little bit off of that surface, and this should bump up quite a bit more than this one. Now coming over here, this should go down a little bit more than this surface, and this should go down quite a bit more than this one will. So we'll test that out. And then these, what we're going to do with this is we're going to just see what these do with varying degrees of blur. Now I just basically took this oval shape, duped it over, and I blurred this one 4 pixels with a Gaussian blur. I did this one with 8 and this one with 12. Now, pardon me, this is a 16-bit image, and I will explain why a little bit later on. But for now, just know that this is a 16-bit image. This was an 8-bit image that we used for these bumps that we did earlier. But this one that we're going to throw in now is actually a 16-bit image. All right, so we've got this in a bump channel right here, and we'll go ahead and shoot a render this and see what we get. All right, so you can see, clearly this is being bumped down a little bit. It's being bumped down more than this one. You've got this one coming up just ever so slightly. You can barely see it. This one coming up a little bit more than that one. So, clearly the 50% gray is doing nothing. And as you can see in this little image right here, again, just as a reminder, this one should be bumping down, this one a little bit more. It's a little hard to tell. It's subtle. Now, over here, you can see this one bumping up. We're getting a nice little kind of beveled edge on this. And then this one, it's feathering out more until it almost just flat out disappears. So in this specific case, let's say that we wanted to make these higher. We wanted this to bump up more. Well, what you would essentially do is you would go into the bump depth and, maybe we'll crank this up to like 5. And we'll re-render this. And it's not really getting what I want. I mean, we're getting a little bit more coming up here, so you can see this a little bit better. But these are still pretty much the same. I mean, I'm not noticing a ton of difference between these. In fact, these two right here, this one and this one, almost look the same to me. So, clearly there's only so far that we can go with a bump map. And if I want these things to really pop off the surface, then we're kind of stuck with where we are. So there's not much more we can do with this. So in this case, if you want to pop these more, you're going to need to do a displacement map on this. All right, so let's go ahead and set that up. In order to generate a displacement map, you are going to need to get to the shading group. Now, every time you click on, like, say, my blend right here, and you show the input connections right here, that's showing everything that's going into that blend shader. So I'll go and click on that, and of course that's what I get. Now, on the other end of this, this blend is actually going into a shading group. And that shading group is what is actually connected to the geometry itself. Now, granted, you do middle mouse drag this onto this surface, if I want to apply that to that. But just know that there is an actual shading group that you don't normally see, and that is what is actually telling the surface what to do. In order to get to that, you're going to need to select your surface, and you don't want to show the input connections, but you want to show the input and output, because this is inputting into the shading group. So if I do that, now you can see the entire string of nodes. And this is the shading group right here. So this is where we're going to need to deal with all of the displacement information. It's not going to be inside of the blend like the bump is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete my bump node. We don't need it any longer. And I'm going to go into this shading group. I'm going to move these over a little bit here. I'm going to go into the shading group. Now, this can get a little bit confusing because inevitably, every time you click on this shading group, it never actually comes up over here. Not really sure why, but you can see it in this tab right here. So just know that when you click this, it's not going to come up in here. You have to actually click on this Blend 1 Shading Group tab, and there you go. So you can see right here that the surface material, the Blend 1, is actually coming into this channel right here. So here's our Blend 1. It is connected inside of this surface material, and that's where it's getting its information from. Now, if you come down a little bit, you can see this displacement material right here. This is where we plug in the displacement map. All right, so here's my map that I want to use. Now remember, previously this was going into a bump node and then into the bump channel over here. So when I grab this image, I'll middle mouse drag it over to the displacement material, and I'll let go. And you can see now we have a new node, which is the displacement shader. All right, so this is what's controlling the displacement on there. Now, just as a default, let's go ahead and save this, and let's go ahead and re-render this out. Now notice this is at 8 seconds is what that last one took. So kind of take a peek and see what the difference is in time. All right, so let's chugging out here, and that one took 10 seconds. So yeah, it's not very complex, but we did add 2 seconds to that render time. Normally your displacement maps are going to be a lot more complex than this. So do keep that in mind, that you are adding render time when you do this. Again, sometimes it's just not worth it. Now here, already, let's save this one, and let's go back to this one, and you can kind of see the difference. The displacement map is a lot cleaner. You can clearly see that this one is bumping up just a little bit, and this one is bumping up quite a bit more. And pardon me for the term bumping up. I actually mean it's displacing a little more. But you can clearly see that difference. You can clearly see this one's going down a little bit, and this one is going down quite a bit more. Now, the cool thing about displacement maps is, if you remember back when we did this with a bump map, we increased the value on the bump map, but we could only push it so far. We had a limit to what we could do with it. In this instance, with actually displacing the geometry, there's a lot more that we can do with this. We can push it quite a bit further. Now, in order to push that further, what we need to do is we need to alter this actual map. There isn't really anything inside of this displacement shader as far as cranking it up a little bit. You know, like in the bump map, you would just change the bump amount right here. This one works a little bit differently. There's really going to be nothing you're going to do inside of this displacement shader. Everything is going to be done inside of the texture map itself. So if I go in here, we've got a couple values. Now, first, it's important to understand the connection that's being made here. And as you can see, if I mouse over the connection, it's actually, for this file 1, it's sending an alpha channel out. Now, again, I don't have an alpha channel inside of this image, so it's just flat out using the luminance or the light and dark values on the RGB information. But as far as Maya is concerned, it is sending one channel out. It's not sending RGB out, it's sending one channel, and that is alpha. And that is going into the displacement of the displacement shader. Okay, so all of the adjustments that we're going to make to this image, we can't really adjust RGB information because no RGB information is going out of here. Only the alpha information is going out of here. So if I click on this image and I go over here to the color balance channel, you've got a couple different sections in here. You've got color gain, color offset, and then you have alpha gain and alpha offset. Well, I can adjust all of these in the color gain as I want, and it's going to do absolutely nothing to this because it's sending alpha information out of this file. So what I want to do is I want to adjust some of this alpha information. And let's say I take this up to, oh, I don't know, say 2. And I'm going to type in a number right here, and we're just going to ignore that for now. I will explain why I did this a little bit later on. But we'll go ahead and bump that up to about 2. And we'll go ahead and save this one, and we'll re-render this again. And what you'll see is we're just basically pushing this geometry quite a bit further than we were before. In fact, that's pushing it a little too far. You're going to end up stretching the texture across here if you push that too far. I mean, keep in mind, you've got UVs laid out on this flat plane, and now we've just completely stretched those UVs out. So this, if you actually needed this, you would model this out. You're not going to displace this much. So let's go ahead and pull that down a little bit, maybe to about 0.5. And I'll change that one as well. And we'll go ahead and re-render this. And if you noticed on that last one, we did add a second to the render time. We'll see what this one does. We were at 10 on the previous one. And looks like we're at about 11 now. So we went from 8 on the bump map to 11 on this one. But again, you can see how much more we did with this. And obviously, you can clearly see that this gray right here is coming up just a little bit. This white's coming up quite a bit more. And then you've got these 2 levels that are going down. So, clearly it's working, and this is far superior in this instance as opposed to a bump map. Now, if you look at these, they're getting a little chunky on the sides, and that is because of the way that we are displacing this. Now, inside of Photoshop, you can see I've got a fairly harsh edge on this. And, we have a limited amount of polygons inside of here. And so you're seeing some of those polygons stretching as they come around the corner here and here. So there's a little bit of a limit to what you can do if you're working with a hard edge like that. And again, here you can see this gets pretty chunky around this edge as well. Now, this same image right here, this same little oval, with a blur of 4 on the Gaussian blur, you can see that changes things altogether. Now we're getting varying levels of gray on the edges, and we're picking up little bevels as it comes around the corner here and here. So remember, this was a clean one. This had a blur of 4, 8, and 12. And you see the more that I blur, the more of a bevel and more of a clean edge that I'm getting on this thing. So if you need to do stuff like this, where you do have just a circle that you want to bump up, it's always good even just to add, even like a 1 pixel blur would help out. This is 4, so we're appearing to get, kind of a angled edge on this. But, if you do need something like this, even 1 on the blur would really, really help this out, and you're going to get away from this chunky feeling that you have on here. All right, so now let's talk just a little bit more about what displacement maps actually do. I'm going to go ahead and open up another file here. And I'll go ahead and open up the vase file. Wait for my computer to catch up here. All right, and back in Photoshop, I'm going to go ahead and open up a different image. And let's see, let's open up these ones. All right, so a couple different images. Now this one, what we want to do is we want to take this information and we want to bump this up. So we got a little stripe here. Let me pull this down so you can see it better. We've got a stripe here that's going to bump up. We've got this little box that's going to bump up, this little pattern. And what we want to do is we want to put this around the edge of a vase inside of Maya. And just kind of bump that up around there. So let's jump into Maya and let's take a quick render of this, just so we can see what we have before we do it. And I think what I might do, I'm noticing that I do have a color channel on there now that I might go ahead and pull off, and it doesn't look like I'm getting anything at the moment. So let's figure out why. Let me pull this down here. In fact, I think what I might do, I think I might just make a new blend and pop this on there. And we're rendering in RenderMan. Let's see what we get here. All right, so here you can see we just got a flat color of our vase. We'll be able to see the displacement a little bit more than with the texture that I had on there. So we want to take that stripe, this pattern, and what we want to do is we want to just put that right across here and have that bump out on this vase. All right, so let's go ahead and set that up first and foremost. Let's close this down. And here is our blend. Now let's, just for comparative sake, let's go ahead and do this as a bump map first, just so we can see what this does. So I'm going to go ahead and use a cylindrical projection on this just to get that wrapped around there. So I'll go to bump mapping as projection, and I'm going to do a file. And I'll go ahead and map that. Now the projection type, I'm going to go ahead and do cylindrical. I want to wrap that all the way around, so I'm going to change that to 360. And we'll go ahead and bring this image in. And that was this one. Okay, let's do a quick test render of this and see what we get. Okay, so that looks pretty terrible at the moment. And we are rendering this in RenderMan, and again, that was a bump. So I think we need to kind of take a peek and see what we've got going on here, because we clearly don't have what we want. So let's see what we've got here. Let's grab this, and this is our placement node. Let's make sure we're on spherical. That's why it looks so strange. Pardon me. We're going to go cylindrical. And let's grab our placement node. And that, of course, is controlling where this is placed on the surface. I'm going to go ahead and scale this cylinder out a little bit and kind of see the cylinder there. And I'll go ahead and go into the side view here. And maybe we'll scale that down a little bit. And maybe we'll place that right about there. So that's kind of where that is going to bump up this image that we have here. Let's take another render. And what we're going to find now is the bump should look good, but we're going to see it pretty much all over the entire vase at this point. And we don't want it up in this area right here. We just want it right here. Plus the fact we're really stretching these out, and we want to keep these somewhat square on this surface. So we'll go in, and of course, to take care of the stretching and this repeat right here, we're going to go into our 2D placement node. We want to turn wrap U and wrap V off. So now, once this texture ends right here, it's not going to repeat up onto there. And in order to take care of this stretching, what we want to do is, rather than have this wrap all the way around the surface, we want to have it go through twice. So we'll go ahead and repeat U 2 times. And let's go ahead and do one more render of this. Now the bump map looks good. You can see clearly it's gone from up here. So the decent looking bump map, but again, in this case it looks a little strange right here. This looks great when the camera is facing this perpendicular right here, but once we get around the edge, this looks a little strange and it looks cheated, and it just doesn't look right. If we look at our silhouette, again, we have a perfectly smooth surface coming through here. So this looks a little weird. This is clearly a case where we're going to want to utilize a displacement map inside of here and not a bump. Of course, again, it just depends on how close you are to the camera. If this thing is way off on a shelf and it's this big, then yeah, put the bump map in there. There's no sense in going through the displacement map route on that one. All right, so let's go ahead and show in and out connections. Let's go ahead and delete our 2D node. And we still need our projection. So in this case, we're not going to be connecting our file texture into the displacement. We want to be connecting our projection node into there because it's kind of the last node in this chain. We go from the 2D placement to the texture to the projection, and then the projection is going to go straight in here. All right, so let's go into our shading group. Let's dump this in here like so. And let's take another render of this. Notice we are at 12 seconds. And let's see what we add as far as render time goes here. It's a fairly simple image, so we probably won't add a ton on there. But we are going to find some issues with this map that we have on there. One being we're displacing it way too far. So we're getting a lot going on there. Do notice that we went up to 19 seconds on that one. So we did add a little bit of render time in there. Let's go ahead and take this value down a little bit. Now, this gets a little strange. Again, we're going from this node to this node and then into our displacement, where before we didn't have this node in the mix at all. We were going straight from here to here. So to pull this value down and make this bump less, in that last example, we would have just adjusted the values on this one. Now, oddly enough, you can adjust it on either or. Because essentially this image is going into here, and you'll notice now that it is actually color information that is coming out of this file. So we've got out color going into this one because it wants color information, but then we've got an alpha coming out of this one. Sorry, that's a little hard to see. Oh well. There is actually alpha information coming out of this one. So what we can do is we can adjust that information on either of these, this one or this one. But just know that you're going to be adjusting color information on this one, so you're going to be working with the color gain and the color offset. In this one, we've got alpha coming out, so you're going to be working with the alpha gain and the alpha offset. Personally, I would prefer doing this one. It's the last one in the chain. It's the one that's going into the displacement. So I would recommend just always doing the last one in the chain to adjust that final image. So inside of here, again, I'm going to jump in here. Maybe we'll do, I don't know, 0.2. Let's see what that does for us. All right, so we're getting our render back here, and you know, I'm gonna hit escape there. I'm gonna do a little bit more on that. Let's go maybe 0.5. Just so we can get a little bit more of a bump on that. In fact, that 0.5 may have been too much. It will serve our purpose, though. All right, so what we're seeing here is the vase is coming down. We're clearly getting a decent displacement map out of this, but we've got a little bit of a problem. We want the vase to come down and then bump out from this right here. Notice it's coming down and it's cutting in, and then it's bumping out and doing everything that it needs to do. This little cut right here is something that we don't want. We don't want it to cut in right there. So let's go back to our Photoshop file and take a look at what we have. Well, again, we said 50% gray is going to do absolutely nothing to this displacement. Dark areas are going to go in. So once this image hits right here at this dark, it's going to go in, and then it's going to come out right here. That's obviously not what we want. One thing that you really have to do is you have to start looking at the values that you have in here. Now, I've got the info palette open up here, and right here under K, we're going to be able to see all of the black values that we have in here. So right here, if I mouse over that, if you look over to that K, you can see I've got 36% black. If I go up to here, now if I go off the image, it goes away, but if I just pull slightly down, you can see I've got 96% black inside of there. And that is the reason, again, why that is going in like that. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to jump into levels, and you're going to want to adjust this stuff. Now, there's a few different ways that you can handle this. We can grab our output levels right here and pull this over, and we can start looking at what we have. We've got 46% black right now, so that's close but not good enough. So you have to really, really watch what you're doing and make sure these levels are perfect in there. Now, I do have another one saved, and it's this one right here. And so I have taken this to 50% gray, pretty much what I just did. So vase displace gray. Let's go ahead and put that in there. I'll jump back into Maya. And let's go ahead and replace this file with the gray one. And let's go ahead and save this one, and we'll go ahead and re-render this. And what you're going to see is we're going to be really close. And I do say close because you have to be perfect on this. Basically, what we're going to get here is you're going to get a little bit of an edge right here still. And that edge is telling me right here that I was not at perfect 50% gray. I'm probably like 1 point off because I still have just a hint of a line going on there where it's still either going in or going out. I can't really tell, but it doesn't really matter. We've got an edge there. Now, on top of that, you can see that we've got quite a few issues going in here. We've got some weird little bumpy things going through here. Notice through here, it has kind of a stair-stepped effect. If you've ever seen a topological map, this is basically what they look like with this kind of stair-stepping. And we want this to be smooth. We don't want all of this artifacting inside of here. So we've got two things that we need to fix at this point in time. The first one is this edge, and the second one is all of this stuff. Now, this edge we can take care of fairly easily just by adjusting those values. This stuff down here is a little bit harder to fix, and unfortunately, this is something you really kind of need to think about beforehand, before you generate these maps. This would be fairly difficult to fix in this current map that we have, and the reason that we're getting this is because we are using an 8-bit image for this displacement. An 8-bit image will rarely work for displacements. You're always going to get this kind of stuff. So I would seriously highly advise never to use an 8-bit image. 8-bit images are fine for bump maps, but for displacement maps, you just can't get away with it. You've got to use at least a 16-bit image. A 32-bit image would be preferred. They take up a little bit more space. You can't edit them as easily. And Maya specifically won't do RenderMan won't do a 32-bit image as of yet. That's coming shortly, but it won't do it yet. So we'll go ahead and stick with 16-bit images at this time, and we'll get a decent result out of that. All right, so let's move into this one a little bit. This is the image that we just used, and let's take a peek at what we have here. Now, again, watch this area up here where it's showing the black. And if I drag down here just to this first pixel, you can see, actually I'm at about 47% right there. I'm going to come over here and try it. 47. So it looks like it is consistent all the way across, but I am at 47%. That's obviously not going to work out. So I'm going to need to go back into levels, and I'm going to need to darken this just a pinch. So let's pull this down just to add some darkness to it. And I'm going to come down, and you can see just as I cross this border, the first pixel, I am at 50% now. Let's kind of check this all the way across. 50, let's go down below here. I am at 50, and then of course it goes up from there. And I'm at 50. So if I was to click on OK, this would work out much better, and that would be much smoother. I wouldn't have that line up at the top there. Now, again, we are 8-bit here, so that fixes this problem with this line, but it doesn't fix any of the stuff that we have going on in here, all of that little artifacting and stair-stepping. We would need a 16-bit image. Now, like I said, unfortunately, we're kind of at a hard point here with this already generated. I could go up to image mode and change this to 16-bit, but unfortunately, all of that information is already there. And that's why I said this would be a hard one to fix. I guess you could hypothetically go in, go to 16-bit, and then you could go in and blur this a little bit. But again, you know, you're blurring out your image at this point, and you're making these transitions more soft, and that might not be what you want. So, you know, I think this would take care of it, but again, you're gonna soften that up quite a bit. I do actually have one that I did as well that is a 16-bit image. So let's jump back into Maya, and let's go ahead and replace this one with the 16-bit one. And let's shoot a render out, and we should see a fairly smooth result as opposed to the ones that we just had there. All right, so you know, you can clearly see we've got a little bit right here, but it is pretty smooth over here. You know, we may even need to just blur that out on the map a little bit better. But you know, I think that's acceptable. But look in here, by using that 16-bit image, it's quite a bit better. We don't have nearly the amount of artifacting. I mean, there's still a hint of it, very, very subtle. And honestly, if this was a 32-bit map, it probably would take care of all of that information, and it would even be cleaner than it is now. However, you know, this is absolutely acceptable. And again, you know, if you look at our silhouette here, we're good on that. Let's come up here and let's delete this image. And it doesn't look like I saved that one with it just bumped. That's okay. I mean, you can clearly see, you know, coming around the edge here, this looks a lot better than it did with a bump. So doing this image up this close, clearly you're going to want a displacement map on here and not a bump map. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about generating these maps. And I'm going to open up a different project here. Actually, let me set that project first. And we'll open up a palm tree that we're going to work on the trunk of this. And this is the same palm tree that I used in the RenderMan demo, but we'll get a little bit more into it here. All right, so for this, I'm going to go ahead and turn off all of these. There's no point in having those in there. And we'll go ahead and zoom into this a little bit. Maybe into about there. And I'm going to check my render settings on this. And of course, I don't want to be in Mental Ray. I do want to be in RenderMan. All right, quality, let's go, 0.4 is fine. And I can probably pull this down a little bit. And let's go to our size here, and we're going to change our size to 700 by 700, so it shows up easy on my screen here. All right, so let's go ahead and render this really quick just to get a frame of reference on this. And what you're going to see is the texture looks good. Actually, it looks quite good because it's already done. Let's undo this. Looks like I already have a displacement map on there. So let's go ahead and 86 that, and let's re-render this again. All right, so there's our image, and you know, the texture looks good. It's repeating nicely. Of course, you know, up this close, again, we've got a problem with this being so smooth, and it's really smooth. Again, if this thing was way off in the distance, then this would be pointless. You may not even need a bump map at that point in time. But for this, you know, we clearly need to alter this. Now, let's just, for sake of doing so, let's try this with a bump map and see what it looks like up this close, just see what we can get out of it. So I'll jump into my surface here, click on bump, And I don't want to do a projection on this one because my UVs are laid out. So let's put a file texture in here. And let's go in here and we'll add this file in, and let's go ahead and save this one. We'll go ahead and render this again, and we'll see what we get out of this. And well, that looks wonderful. All right, so we've got a few things we need to fix here. Clearly our color texture, you can see that we've altered our 2D placement, so we're not matching up on that. So I'll go ahead and just delete that 2D placement, and I'll drop this on that one so they can share that information. And I think that our bump is going to be too high, so I'm going to pull that down just a little bit. And let's go ahead and render that again. All right, so what we're going to find here is, you know, I take that back. Even with a bump map, this looks terrible. So there's no way that we can get away with it here. It's just not even possible. All right, so let's just go ahead and just stick this right into into our shading group here. I'm going to delete my my bump, and we'll jump in here and throw this one into the displacement. Now, you should know at this point in time that the way that this map was generated, this displacement map that we're using, it was generated by just taking this color map and converted to grayscale. It was desaturated, and then I adjusted some of the levels on it. You know, clearly inside of this, you've got these areas that are pushed in. This is a less dense material than this is, so this gets eroded away a little bit. And so these are going to need to bump in quite a bit more than these ones are. So that's kind of what we're after here. Let's do a render of this with the displacement map on here and see what we get. Hopefully it'll look better than that bump map did. All right, we're not getting anything at the moment, so let's troubleshoot this a little bit. I'm going to scale this window down just a pinch here. All right, so there's where we were. There's where we are now. And you can see that it is actually kind of squeezing the image in a little bit. So we know it's doing something. Let's go in here. And I'm going to adjust a couple things in here. Again, don't worry about what I'm doing now. I will explain this in a little bit. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and just type those in. And let's shoot another render out of this. Basically, what we're going to find here is by utilizing this image, we're just not going to accomplish what we want. And I think we just took that way too far. This ought to be interesting. Yeah, and you can see it's taken forever to render this too. We're pushing that way out into oblivion there. All right, so I'm going to hit escape and cancel that one. And I'll go ahead and just do 1. And I'll do -0.5 on that value. And let's try this one more time here. All right. Well, it looks like we're still pushing it a little bit too far. I'll hit escape. Sometimes this takes a while to get these. We'll go 0.1 and -0.05. And we'll try this one more time. Hopefully this value will be a little bit better. Still a little bit too much on that, but you can see we're clearly displacing it. It looks a little furry at the moment. So let's try 0.04 and -0.02. Let's try that. The bottom one might have been too much. All right, we're getting a little bit better here. I'm going to do one more, and that should be 0.02. Sorry about that. But the point here, we're already starting to see that this map isn't going to work for us. One, we're getting way too much information inside of this area, and this pattern isn't what this tree would actually do. I'm actually going to try one more on this. And let's try a 1 there. We'll do one more. Basically, the way that this works with a real tree is all of these rings are created from the palm fronds as they grow out. Now, they grow out, eventually they end up dying. That's why a lot of times you'll see the ones in the middle toward the bottom of the crown up there kind of hanging down. And they get cut off. So these rings are left from where this tree has grown and got bigger, but essentially these little areas are where palm fronds had come off of here. This pattern of it doing this and just going in and coming out isn't what it would actually look like in real life. It actually comes out and then back in, out, back in, out, back in. So we get this kind of pattern, like a saw going up, so diagonally and then back in, diagonally back in. So that's kind of the pattern that we're looking for. Now, again, on top of that, we want all of this bumpiness inside of here, but other than the cracks in this area, these areas maintain a fairly smooth finish. So the point here is we can't just take our color map in this instance, if we're going to be this close, and just convert it to grayscale and use it as a displacement. It's just not going to work for us. All right, so let's jump into Photoshop and we'll open up a file here. And we've got this trunk build file right here. All right, so we'll talk about what we want to do. Now, basically, the way that I handled this is I took my color information, which again, this is repeatable. This repeats up and around the tree, so there's no seams in it. And this was shot somewhere in the Caribbean with my camera on a nice cloudy day, and I just found a couple of nice, really wide trees where there wasn't a lot of shading information on them, and went ahead and shot those. All right, so what I did was I took this image, I converted it to grayscale, and I essentially, I knew these areas needed to go in more than these, but as you can see right now, the image is actually fairly monotone, meaning we're going to get just a somewhat equal amount of movement in the displacement across the map. So what I did was I actually went in and I selected all of these areas. So I grabbed my marquee tool, or my lasso tool, and I went across here, and then I went across here, and then across there, and I basically separated all of these smooth areas from these rough areas. And you know, I know that sounds a little tedious, but A, it's kind of what you need to do, and B, I wasn't that perfect with it. It didn't really take that long. So sometimes in order to get the result that you want, it's just kind of what you need to do. So anyway, I grabbed all of those, saved that as a selection. In fact, here you can actually see the selection. There's a reverse of that selection. So I can select the smooth areas, and I can select the rougher areas as well. And, you know, again, once I had these as an alpha, I just inverted this one and copied it. So I've got all those saved in there. So what I did was I converted it to grayscale, or I duped the layer. I did a hue saturation. I desaturated it. Sorry, I didn't really convert it to grayscale. I just pulled the saturation off of it. And let me jump back in here. And my layers just went somewhere. All right, there they go. So there's the image converted to a desaturated grayscale. And then I brought up this selection for this interior stuff. And I just darkened these very roughly, as you can see. Put a little bit of variance in some of these. Just kind of some dark edges around here. And again, this is pretty haphazard. I really didn't spend that much time working on this. It's nature. It's random. It doesn't need to be perfect anyway. So that's how I dealt with all that. And that'll cause these to bump in a little bit more than these areas. Now, the whole concept of getting this to come up and then in, So it kind of comes diagonal and then cuts in, comes up diagonal and cuts in. Getting that, we're going to need something a little bit different. So what I did was I made another layer, and I used that same selection for these interior ones, and I basically put a gradient running from the bottom to the top of them like so. So now what's going to happen is these upper areas are going to bump out pretty much what I want, and these darker areas are going to just kind of blend into what we've got going down here. What I did on this, and if I just show normal, that's what I've got. I've got just a gradient from light to dark sitting on top of all of this, and then I ended up using a hard light on it. Now what that did as well, you can tell, is it pulls some of the detail out of this area. So if you remember back in here, we were getting just too much bumpiness going on through here. We wanted to smooth this a little bit. So by doing that, you can see it pulls some of that information out of there and smooths it out and gets that gradation that we need to generate what we want. All right, so with that, let's jump into Maya. And let's go ahead and replace this image with the one that is done. And that's the one that you just saw there. And we'll go ahead and shoot a render of this. And what you'll see is, again, we just get a much nicer displacement coming across the top like so. And we smoothed these areas out a bit. We're still sinking these down in. So that is much better with what we want to accomplish. So, the point of all this is that when you're generating these maps, you constantly have to think, okay, 50% gray is absolutely nothing. Lighter than 50% gray is going up, hence the decision to put that gradient coming through here to make these things bump up like this. Darker is going to go in. And so you, in Photoshop, can generate your maps accordingly. So really, really important that you pay attention to those. All right, our last one here, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Mudbox a little bit. More than likely, you're going to be doing quite a bit of your displacements in Mudbox. And there's just some settings that you need to know, and it's kind of why I saved this one for last. All right, so let's open up a new file here, and that's going to be in this one. This is the same head that we did in the texturing exercises. So we'll open up this guy again. All right, so here's our model. Now, if we go back into Mudbox, you can see what it looks like once we've gone through and put a lot of detailing and displacement maps inside of here. Sorry, not displacement maps, but sculpting. We're going to generate a displacement map from this sculpting. All right, so it's really important to understand what Mudbox does when it generates a displacement map. We brought this in at a level 0, which is essentially what we're seeing right here. This is a level 0 mesh. And you can see the mesh right here. We've got quite a bit of geometry in here for this, but that's okay. It smooths it out nicely in here. Just as an FYI, I do have a subdivision scheme on this as well, so it will smooth it out even further at render time. But the point is this is a level 1 mesh. And back inside of here, you can see that we are at a level 5 right now. So we have like 4 million polygons in here. This is a lot of polys. In fact, if I turn off smooth shade, you can't even see the faceting on here now. There is so much geometry in here. In fact, I'll turn on wireframe and you still can't tell because the wireframe is so dense on here. Turn that off. And what Mudbox is going to do is it's going to use a ray tracing function on this to compare the two models. What we want it to do is we're going to say, all right, go through, ray trace my level 1 mesh the way that I brought it in, and analyze that surface. Then go in and ray trace the level 5, which is where we're at now, and analyze that surface. Then take those two bits of information between the two models, compare them, And where you find differences, go ahead and generate a grayscale displacement map off of that. So that is kind of the function that it's doing when it's generating these maps. So I'll go ahead and show you how to generate these maps inside of here. It doesn't really matter what level you're set at. I believe if you're in ZBrush, you have to be at your lowest level when you do this, but Mudbox doesn't really care, so we'll just do it right here. That's fine. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to Utilities. We're going to go to Texture Baking. Now, I've already baked this out once, so I can see I have a baker number 0 in here, and I could have named this if I wanted to. But if you're doing this for the first time, you're not going to have this here. You're just going to have New Operation. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and do a new operation. And it's going to bring up a little window here. Again, now it's going to name this one baker number 1. And you can name this whatever you want. Like, you know, say you're saving out different things and you want to save these settings inside of here. You can save this Aborigine head underscore for displacement at 4K or whatever, just as long as you understand what it is. All right, I'm not really going to worry about that. I don't usually name those anyway. All right, so here's what we need to do. We need to specify the low resolution mesh. And you will notice that I do have the head geometry selected, FYI. I'm not doing anything on these ones, just on the head at this point in time. All right, so we need to specify the low resolution mesh. And that low resolution mesh is going to be the head geometry level 1. Because remember, we brought it in at a level 0, and then we subdivided it one time, and then that one... Once we did it the one time, all of the bulk changes are done. That level 1 is sent back to Maya for render time. And that's why when I just went to Maya, that we had so many faces inside of there. It's because it was the level 1. So we don't want to go to level 0. We want to go to the level 1. And that is going to be our low resolution mesh that we want to compare to. All right, so head geo level 1. I guess hypothetically, I just said I have this selected. I don't think it really matters technically because we're specifying here regardless. All right, so low res mesh level 1. Subdivision. What you're going to do is specify the quality that you want this map to be set at. Frankly, good is good enough. High and highest are going to add just ridiculous amounts of render time on this. And from what I have seen, you don't really get a whole lot out of it. In fact, if you look at the manuals for this, they will tell you that good is good enough. So why they have these in there, I don't know. It's like on a scale from 1 to 10, this is 11 and 12 or something like that. Anyway, good, we'll just keep it there. All right. High-res mesh. Well, the high-res mesh, of course, is going to be the head geometry at a level, it says level 6, but we're actually only seeing level 5. Point is you want to be at the highest level or the level at which you want to send this information out. And if you have, you know, all of this information in your highest level, then yeah, you're going to be picking your highest level here. All right, we don't need to do a selection set. We're not loading a mesh from a file at all. You can have a displacement map saved out. You can load it onto here while you're doing this process if you want to. But we're not going to do any of those. We're just generating a map here. Again, subdivision, we'll just keep it to good. That's fine. We'll get a great result out of both of those. All right, moving down. What type of a map are we generating here? Well, it depends on what industry you're in. If you are in the gaming industry, you're probably going to be creating a normal map. Now, we haven't talked about this a whole lot yet with the whole displacement bump. There is another type that is going to create bumpiness, and this is called a normal map. Video game engines can handle normal maps. They can handle bump maps. They cannot handle displacement maps yet. I would assume, you know, at some point in time in the future, those will come around. But for now, they can't handle those. Now, bump map is going to be the cheapest way to render something. Normal map is going to kind of fall in the middle where a displacement would be the most expensive. So for a video game engine, you're probably going to be using normal maps quite a bit. You can get a really good result out of them, a lot better than a bump map. And again, the current game consoles can handle those. So if you are doing gaming, this is where you're going to generate your normal maps. There's really no difference. It's still going to generate a map that's going to create bump. Now, it doesn't use grayscale values. It actually utilizes color information, but the point is that it plugs in all the same. All right, so we're not creating a normal map at this point. We're thinking more of a feature film scenario, and for that, we're going to be generating displacement maps. So we're creating displacement map. We would need to name this displacement map, or it's not going to do anything. So in order to name it, we're going to click on this button right here with the 3 dots, and you would go in and you would find the folder that you want to save this in. So your source images inside of the folder you're working in. I'm actually not going to save this one out, but this is where you would name that file: Aborigine head, level 6, displacement, or whatever your naming convention dictates. All right, so that would be inside of there. Now, of course, you need to specify the size of it. So maybe you're doing a 2K map, so 2048. It'll do 4K maps, even though once you get up into 4K maps, I find that Mudbox crashes a little bit. I don't know if it runs out of memory or what it's doing, but sometimes it has a little bit of an issue on that. File type, of course, you always want to do TIFF. You can do Targas, JPEGs, PNGs, whatever. RenderMan loves TIFFs, so we're going to keep this set at TIFFs. Now, search distance. This is kind of a tough one. Initially, you're going to want to keep this set at the default, and the default right now is 3.57. Basically, this search distance is specifying, all right, I've got an imaginary camera inside of the scene, and again, it's going to render at level 1, it's going to render at level 6. We're never going to see those renders, FYI. It's just doing it just to analyze the geometry. Now, this search distance is specifying how far the camera is going to shoot a ray toward this model. And if this number is off, you're going to get clipping inside of your model. For example, I'll show you what that looks like here. Let's jump back in here. Source images. We'll go into our displacement map and open that. Okay, this is what clipping looks like. Notice we have nice smooth grayscale values, and we have really abrupt changes right here in lights and darks. I think I had a couple down here, maybe right there. So that's clipping, and clipping is going to occur when your search distance is off. Now, these just happen to be in areas where they don't matter. These are inside of the eye sockets, and these are up inside of the nostrils, so it doesn't really make any difference. These right here, however, these 2 little dots, these are going to be right on the upper eyebrows, so we may get a spike in the geometry in those 2 places right there. And again, this is all because my search distance was off a little bit. So what you need to do is you need to generate a displacement map. You need to look at it in Photoshop, see if you have any clipping, and then you need to change this. If you're getting clipping, you may want to up this search distance just a little bit and go very small increments at a time, just barely moving this, and just see the results that you get by changing this. If you go up and the clipping gets worse, then obviously you need to go back down. So just use the default. I find about 90% of the time the default works fine. But if you are getting clipping, that is where you're going to need to go in and take care of that. All right, now we'll go into the advanced settings. And there's a couple things that we need to do inside of here. I generally will leave all of this, most of this information as is. Notice you've got a huge section for normal map settings right here. And I find that when you are generating normal maps inside of here, probably for our purposes, the best thing to do is to come to this preset and just go to Maya. And it's going to set up everything for us. So just know that if you are generating normal maps. Now in displacement map settings, there's pretty much one thing that we need to change here. And again, that is we are at a displacement map of 8-bit, and that's not going to work. You're going to want to go to a 16-bit, not black and white. We want to go to 16-bit. Or, if you are rendering in like mental ray, you can go ahead and do a 32-bit. But again, RenderMan won't handle that right now. One thing that we haven't talked about yet, which I'll touch on briefly, it's just kind of a given, frankly. You'll notice that I didn't do any of these displacements inside of Maya. And that's because Maya's render engine just cannot handle them. I've never gotten a decent displacement map out of Maya. It just won't do them very well. So I just don't worry about that too much. All right, so anyway, for this, we are rendering in RenderMan, so I would go to 16-bit, and I would go ahead and just hit start on this. Okay, so once you hit start, it's going to think for a while. I've seen really complex displacement maps take an hour to do this. That's happened before. Sometimes I'll get them back in a couple minutes. That is possible as well. All right, so with that, we'll just pretend that we actually have that map done, and we'll go ahead and jump in Maya here, and let's see what we get out of this. We'll jump into our hypershade, and let's go ahead and looks like we don't have a shader on there right now. So let's go ahead and make a blend shader, and we'll pop that on there like so. And maybe just for grins, maybe we'll go ahead and put this in as a bump map just to see what it looks like. I'm just curious. Being that the levels are so spread out, we're probably not going to get a very good result, but what the heck, we'll see what it does. All right, image name, jump in here, source images, displace, and let's check our render settings. We're doing 700 by 700, RenderMan 0.25, all that looks good. And let's render this really quick. Now, again, we have a subdivision scheme on this, and that just looks terrible. That's just not going to work out as a bump, so I don't think we really need to worry about that too much. And it looks like, because this is rendering twice here, it looks like we actually have some subsurface scattering on this, so I'm actually going to open up a different file here that's going to be a little bit more clean than that one. And we'll wait for it to catch up here. Go ahead and make a new blend. We'll put that on there. And we'll go ahead and just put this right into the displacement map since we know that that's what we want to do anyway. Okay, so go into our shading group. And we'll go into displacement, normal, file, and we'll get to our texture here, and we'll jump in and put that displacement map in. All right, so now we've got a blend surface. There you can see our shading group. You can see that we've got our displacement going in there. There's our file, there's our placement. Everything looks good. Let's go ahead and do a render of this, and we'll see what we get. And you're going to see we're going to get a really strange result out of this. Everything's going to get really big and poofy looking. Everything looks a little bit strange. And there is an adjustment that we need to make on this file to get rid of all of this information. So here is the rule of thumb on this, and you've seen me do this throughout this lecture. We essentially need to normalize this map, and in order to normalize the values on this map, it's basically Mudbox created a grayscale image, and Maya is interpreting it a little bit differently than Mudbox would. So we need to normalize that so that the two programs are thinking that it's the same thing. And the way that this works is you're going to do -1/2 on the offset. that you have on the gain. So for example, if we have a gain of 1, we would do a negative value, and then half of this number would be 0.5. So half of that, and then make it a negative. And now we will actually get quite a bit better result out of this. It doesn't look like it's going to be strong enough. We're going to need to bump up the values a little bit. You can see we're starting to get some of this. We're starting to get a lot of this information inside of the eye right here. Some of it coming through there. We're getting some of it coming through the lips right here. But we need to crank that up a little bit. So let's crank this up to maybe like 3, and then that would be negative 1.5. Again, negative half of that number. And we'll go ahead and shoot out another render, and we actually should get a really good render out of this one. You can see we're picking up all of that subtle detail, the bumps, we're picking up all of this information, and that looks quite nice. Looks like we have a little bit of an issue right here, a little artifact going on there, and I would need to go back and check my map. Maybe I have a little bit of clipping right there, and a lot of times that's what that would look like. You can just barely see the eyelid right here, and if you remember, I had those 2 white dots, and I'm going to guess that that's that white dot showing through there. All right, so that is about it for bump and displacement mapping.